So I do that on preview. There we go. We are ready to start. A little bit late, but not as late as before. Just a little bit of tech that needed to be addressed. But welcome everyone to our, I think it's ninth class of the semester. And I'm going to jump into the continuation of the story very shortly. I just wanted to introduce you to a really striking new picture of the planet that I've been able to get from NASA that was taken just a few years ago, actually 2015 or 16, by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter that goes around the moon, and this is not a photoshopped image at all. It just happens to be something they were able to capture at that moment with the cameras that they had. They put together a series of images into this larger image that is really a striking picture of the planet from about 200 kilometers away from the moon. As the orbiter is going around the moon, it just happened to catch this at the right time. And there are so many pictures of the planet these days, but this one I like because it's real, it's striking, it's beautiful. And in it, you can see the continent of Africa. The brown part is the Sahara Desert. And if you can orient yourself a little bit to the map of the world as well, you'll be able to also see, of course, the continent of Africa in the middle of the world map. And Africa should be in the middle because that's really where the whole story, the human story, began. So um, I thought today I would make sure that we can have a really good reminder of what this story is all about, which is we're living at the time in history when irreversibly the world has become a planet. And we humans have sort of known that for some time, but it was only in the 20th century and only in the last 60 years when we've had these photographs and when we've had orbiters and lunar missions and satellites and space exploration. And as of yesterday, now Elon Musk firing off what he says is the world's most powerful rocket. Yesterday, he is always working on greater and greater propulsion. This is what's so critical in space exploration, is to get the rockets off the planet and then able to break through the gravitational field around Earth, which is pushing everything back to Earth. And so the propulsion in the rocket has to be strong enough that it can push against gravity and then get us away from the gravitational field and then into the fuller atmosphere and the cosmos. And then eventually, as the rocket ships get closer to other planets or the moon, they then are um, propelled into their gravitational fields. So once they get into the gravitational field of the moon, gravity starts to pull the ship to the moon. Same with Mars, same with other planets. I love talking about space exploration, and in Humanities Destiny, the other one of the other courses I teach, we really do spend a lot of time looking at life off the planet, or what we think might be off the planet, fairly soon. At any rate, before I get going on the lecture, I want to make sure that everybody in the cosmos is good. If there are any questions, please feel free right now to jump on your microphone, Andy, Stephen, Ovayata, or go into the live chat. Otherwise, I'm going to start the lecture. And if you want to say something, I think the best thing to do, if you want to jump on your microphones at any point, is just digitally raise a hand, because we will see it here and we will hear it as well. But I am beginning to become adjusted to the fact that most of the students who are online prefer to just talk through the live chat and not share their video. So I've set things up now on this panel so that I can really access the live chat much better. And that way I can come straight to it. Over here, I've got things set up with the extended. Anyways, this thing is a technical, you know, nightmare for me sometimes. But we can work from the live chat, and that's great. So I take it that Andy, Stephen, and Ovayata have nothing they want to add at this point or ask. It's always good to have all of you in the class, and it's always good to see a few students. You don't need many in person. And do you want to come? Would you be able to come up to the couch so we can have you in the see you here? Is that okay? That way we can the students can see you. We can see everybody's heads somehow. And you're just slightly out of view. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue the story, and then in about 40, 45 minutes, maybe less if I can really move quickly, we're going to jump into our interaction. And please feel free at any point to make a note for yourself or put something in the live chat that you think we need to bring up in the interaction part. But I think I've got the balance right now in terms of content and discussion. And finally, what we want to do at the end of today's class, like every class, is get some great notes up there that we do together, some takeaway notes. And that part is still not quite where I would like to be. It's a little bit weak at this point in terms of the notes that we're making, but we'll get there. Okay, so let me bring the actual presentation uh, here, and I'm going to start it here, and you should see it there. Great. Okay. So let's try and remember that as we continue to tell this story chronologically in a very introductory way, with me helping you to understand what are some of the breakthroughs towards the realization of greater and greater power for ourselves on this planet. That we are talking about humanity, which is all of us, but we're also talking about the state of humanity, the, the bond. And just to remind you of what I mean by the bond of humanity, this morning when I was coming up here, first by subway from High Park in Toronto, and then I get the 407 bus from the 407 station. When I stepped on the subway in Toronto, I didn't see our favorite pigeon I've mentioned before, but I will probably see him or her again soon. What I was struck by when I got onto the subway this morning with all of the people was how comforted I felt at that moment. It was quiet. Everybody was either standing, with their headphones on or reading something or just waiting or waking up. But in this silence, we're all just sort of getting ready for the day. There was no anxiety. Maybe people were feeling it underneath, but it was just this nice human feeling that we are all together and we're all kind of quiet together and we're all beginning our day together on the subway. And had there been a moment today when a homeless person might have burst out with something very profane, or somebody might have acted in a way that was inappropriate, which happens all the time on the subway, or somebody had their phone on really loud. If that had happened, it would have broken that feeling. But at that moment, as I sat down and just felt that sense of humanity together and everybody's at peace. It was nice. Have any of you ever felt that? That sense of being at peace? That's what I would call the human bond. That's partly what I mean about the bond of humanity there. It's important to remind us of that bond because when we go online today, in that other world, that digital virtual world that we've created for ourselves, and that's very new for humans. We have an alternate reality now that you have access to every single moment of the day. It's called the virtual world. In that world, it's crazy. It's a giant playground of all sorts of things, but it's also messy and it's also violent and it's also depraved. It's also beautiful, but there is so much conflict. You might get maybe a slightly skewed and twisted version of humanity, but the real humanity, I would like to think, is us together, just like now, in person. And we have the virtual part that's working okay, but the in person part is the best part. And so, in this story that I'm going to continue to help you to understand today, to bring you to a deeper understanding of your life and our story on this planet, it's important to remember that we have this special bond and this special thing. I'm going to pick up the story today with still a little bit at Spells of Our God Kings and keep moving into a greater world and then getting to the conquest. But I want to just remember that we're starting, as always, with another giant today. And today's giant is Alfred North Whitehead. He is the philosopher whom I have quoted before, and I brought in something from his great Adventures of Ideas that I'd like to read out loud momentarily to remind you of how important his thinking was. But before I do that, I want to first apologize and correct myself. I never did read from Thucydides, the great giant that I told you about, the Greek historian. I said I would, and then I got off on something else, and I didn't have time to go back and read that. I want to read you a little bit from Thucydides right now, the part that I neglected to read. And to remind you of who Thucydides was, there are two very important historians in the story of humanity, at least who were writing and who were eyewitnesses pretty well to critical moments in history. And they were the two Greeks during the golden age of Athens. Herodotus, who wrote a history of the Persian Wars, which is considered by many the first real historical account written by somebody who was trying to just explain it to us in the most objective and detailed way without any religion or ideology behind it. It's often said he's the father of history or historiography, the craft of history writing. But then his student, Thucydides, was the one who I showed you a picture of, and he was the one who was writing about the Peloponnesian War when Athens got its butt kicked eventually and was defeated by the Spartans. And it was because of a plague, in part because of a plague that afflicted Athens and brought down its leader Pericles that led to its defeat. So I just wanted to read you, just briefly, an account of the plague that afflicted Athens. And it comes from Thucydides. And he not only was an eyewitness, he got the plague and survived from this, but many didn't. And I just want to read this because every lecture that I start, it's really important for you to understand how important sources are. Good scholarly sources. You have so much information today at your fingertips, and it's really important to know what's a good source and what is a source that we might call misinformation or disinformation. Disinformation is weaponized information. That's information that somebody has deliberately used to influence you. They know what they're doing. They may be even lying. Misinformation is just a mistake, an honest mistake. Disinformation is the stuff that we really want to be alert to today. So every time I read from a giant of scholarship, these are the sources that matter, and they're good sources. Listen to this. The Plague of Athens, Thucydides writing 2,400 years ago. It was said that it had broken out in many places previously in the neighborhood of Lemnos and elsewhere, but a pestilence. I love that word. The plague is often called pestilence. Isn't that evocative when you hear the word pestilence instead of plague? Somebody's going to have to write that down soon. But, anyways, we'll get there. But a pestilence of such extent and mortality was nowhere remembered. Neither were the physicians at first of any service, ignorant as they were of the proper way to treat it. But they died themselves the most thickly, as they visited the sick most often, nor did any human art succeed any better. Supplications in the temples, divinations, and so forth were found equally futile till the overwhelming nature of the disaster at last put a stop to them altogether. The poor Greeks, as smart as they were, and as open as they were to free thinking, they were far behind us in medical science. It first began, it is said, in the parts of Ethiopia above Egypt, and thence descended into Egypt and Libya and into most of the king's country. Suddenly falling upon Athens, it first attacked the population Piraeus, which was the sort of harbor area around Athens, which was the occasion of their saying that the Peloponnesians or the Spartans had poisoned the reservoirs, there being as yet no wells there, and afterwards appeared in the upper city when the deaths became much more frequent. So there was a kind of rumor that the Spartans might have been engaging in biological warfare. We're going to see this coming in the conquest with the germs that the Europeans are going to bring over, and all, or at least 90% of the 70 million or so indigenous population that lived in the Americas, many of them are going to perish from the plagues that afflict them because of the germs brought over. And the Europeans knew what they were doing, biological warfare. All speculation as to its origins and its causes, if causes can be found adequate to produce so great a disturbance, I leave to other writers, whether lay or professional. For myself, I shall simply set down its nature and explain the symptoms by which perhaps it may be recognized by the student if it should ever break out again. This I can the better do, as I had the disease myself. Eyewitness. This is important history when you're getting it. I'm going to be reading you something today from a book called Eyewitness to History. It is a collection of accounts from history put together by a British journalist of all sorts of eyewitnesses who've been there writing over the last millennia and centuries about events that they have seen firsthand. This is the best kind of history, firsthand. These people were there. Alfred North Whitehead is a little bit different. And I just want to read you a little something from him, and then I'm going to jump into the story. He lived in the 20th century. He was a witness to important events that took place in the world, but he was also writing about history from the vantage point of somebody who was reflecting back in time. So an eyewitness is good, but also being able to sit back as you were doing with your reflections and think and reflect on what has happened And that's what he did in Adventures of Ideas. And good, Stephen, just keep putting questions in there and we'll come to them, okay? He is the one who has helped me to understand the person you're looking at now, the idea of how important the discovery of freedom has been for humans in the human story, because that's what we're going to be looking at more today as we continue with the story. This idea that humans in human civilization did not choose freedom for themselves, did not choose democracy for themselves, but in their hearts and in their dreams, if they could just overcome their fears of the natural world and of disaster, and if they could just grow up, as H.G. Wells has said about humans, we could win ourselves more freedom, more liberty. Let me just read you this because he helps us to understand something that will always be haunting and resonating throughout. And he says in Adventures of Ideas, we can watch some of the episodes in the discovery of freedom. About 1400 years before Christ, the Egyptian king Akhenaten evidently belonged to an advanced group who thought for themselves and made a step beyond the inherited religious notions. Such groups with flashes of free thought must have arisen sporadically many times before during countless thousands of years, some successful, most of them failures. And this is the part I like. Otherwise, the transition to civilization, think about this, the transition to civilization, we're living in civilization, but it's very new. It just started 10,000 years ago or so. Remember how new it is? Okay, good. Stephen's putting stuff in there. Otherwise, the transition to civilization, as distinct from the mere diversity of adaptations of thoughtless customs, could never have arisen. Bees and ants. Bees and ants have diverse social organizations. But so far as we know, neither species is in any sense civilized. They may enjoy thoughtless adaptations of social customs. Anyhow, their flashes of freedom are below the level that we can discern. But Akhenaten, having exercised his freedom, evidently had no conception of freedom as such. And we have all the evidence archaeology can provide that he rigidly endeavored to impose his notions upon the thoughts and customs of the whole Egyptian nation. Apparently, he failed, for there was a reaction. Remember, Akhenaten tried, and then everything went back to the way it was. But reactions never restore with minute accuracy. Thus, in all probability, there remained a difference, which the evidence before us is unable to discriminate. What he's saying is, once you open the door to something, once there's a new idea for humans, you can't shut it. And these flashes of freedom and flashes of free thought are going to get greater and greater now in our story, to the point where we are going to be seeing soon more attention paid to human rights and freedom and less to the God Kings. And we can thank people like Alfred North Whitehead for helping us to understand that. And he did something quite rare in the academic world. He was a professor at Cambridge University in England, the 20th century, and he was teaching in the sciences. And then in his retirement, he was asked to come to Harvard University in the United States, where he began to teach philosophy. And that's what led him to write Adventures of Ideas. I put him up there in the same place as Jacob Bronowski. These are these wonderful scholars who are both scientific thinkers and also social and philosophical thinkers. But let's get back to the story. Last class, we ended with, I thought, a really good discussion about the meaning of suffering. And John stood here, Nico stood here, and Stephen was talking from the cosmos as well. And we had a figure, a very important figure, as we were looking at spells of our God Kings, somebody from India who kind of defied that idea of a God King and who changed the way power would work. And that was Prince Siddhartha Gautama and then Ashoka, the Indian emperor. The idea, though, of a God King has been so deep in the human story that this image, for example, that you're looking at right now, comes actually from a cave not far from Mexico in the Americas. And what you can see in this image, it's about 17,000 years old. We are seeing an early society in the Americas, but we see the same kind of power structure, which is there is a leader who is standing, and somebody has come to him on his knees, a supplicant, and is asking for something. And that leader is the God King in his society. In, in the Americas, a place we haven't really visited yet that much, but we will be more as we move towards the point when the Western Hemisphere, which is everything west of the Atlantic Ocean, is going to come together with the Eastern Hemisphere. In other words, Eurasia is going to meet the Americas, and that is going to be a very important turning point in our story. But in the Americas, before there was any contact between the Europeans and others, they too had their societies, and they too were adhering to the idea of a God King. And such was their power, the God King, that in their pyramid-like structures too, this is exactly Chichen Itza. You can see this today. There were Mayan societies, Olmec societies. We will be getting to know soon the Inca societies of Peru, and many others. You have been there? Okay, good. Well, save that for the discussion, okay? The idea is that in a public square, imagine this scene. Just to give you an idea of the power, deification that the God King demanded in that part of the world too. There would be a gathering of people, of humans, in a square around this temple. We've seen this structure before. It's almost universal in its design, just like the early ziggurats as well, the pyramids of Egypt. But here, what did they do in these societies? Well, there was a stairwell or a staircase that went all the way to the top. And up to 15 or 20,000 people would gather in the square as a moment of worship. And the God King of that world, the leader, would be standing at the top, and he would be preparing to kill somebody as a sacrifice. And out of the crowd beneath this, one person would be chosen, and it would be an honor to walk up, make this long walk up, stand at the top of this with the God King, lie down on a kind of a flattened stone, and with no drug, no anesthetic, nothing, have your chest completely cut open, heart taken out. This would be offered to the gods by the God King as a sign of the need, as William McNeill has shown us before, to offer the gods something from us to show that we're prepared to sacrifice ourselves to the God for the security of the God. so that we will not have a natural disaster. And the blood would flow down the stairs all the way down, and the body would be rolled up and pushed down like a ball and would go down the stairs all the way down. Heart would be up there, the sacrifice would be made, and the body would go back down. And it would be an honor to be the person chosen to be sacrificed. It's important for you to always remember that when we talk about the power of the God King, we're talking not about just the Eurasian world, about Mesopotamia or about Asia or soon about other parts of those societies, but we're talking about all over the world. In Africa, for example, there was a great God king from Western Africa who had enormous deposits of gold. And he was worshiped as well like a God king. And we see that this continuing worship of one strong male figure who's a source of wealth, who has a connection to higher powers, will be something that we humans are soon going to have to grapple with. Because at the same time as we've had this way of governing ourselves, we also have this dream to be more free. I want to tell you something about China. We're moving around the world a little bit more today to open this up because it's going to get bigger and bigger with the story now as we start to see how these societies will eventually connect. You're looking at an island near Hong Kong. It's called Lantau Island. There is an enormous statue of a Buddha there. The idea of Buddhism that came from India eventually made its way to China and became a very important part of Chinese culture too. So the focus last week when we were trying to understand what is it that Prince Siddhartha Gautama brought to the world that is so important? Why did it influence Ashoka and make him the first emperor who renounced violence? But then why would it spread the way it did also into China and elsewhere in the world, across the Far East? Because of that question that I never answered for you last week. And now I have to. In China, you will see figures of the Buddha in many places. What was the question that I asked last week? I'll just see if any of you know. You don't have to actually answer it right now, but you can just kind of raise a hand a little bit if you remember the question, the big question that was put on the smart board about what was the question that the original Buddha was trying to answer. Okay, Jazir, you remember? Just hold it, okay, for a second. I'm going to answer the question for you because I want to make sure we can move on today, but we will return to this in the discussion, okay? When the prince sat beneath a tree for hours and hours and hours and tried to understand in his moment of meditation, why do we suffer so much? Why do humans suffer? His answer was because of our appetites, because we want too much. We want and we want and we want, and we can never stop wanting. But once we stop wanting, once we stop consuming, once we start appreciating, we start to go in another direction that can bring peace for humanity. India understood this. China understood this. Japan will understand this. Indonesia, Malaysia, and other parts of the Far East, And this idea will gradually begin to grow for humanity. The idea that if we want peace, then we have to learn how to be at one, if you will, with the natural world, not try to dominate anything. Now, this doesn't always speak so well to those who have very little in the world, because we often say today there are the haves and the have nots. And it's a little bit unfair to say to the have nots of the world, stop wanting what the haves have. We have inequality, we have injustice, and we want to make sure that people who don't have much will have what others have. So they should want more. But at a higher state, at a very high level, the prince was trying to tell us that the source of happiness, the source of love, the source of humanity for our future is to stop wanting so much. And there's another person who's going to come into our story at a very critical moment near the beginning of the 20th century, one of the great writers of world literature, Leo Tolstoy in Russia, who wrote the classic War and Peace. And he is going to come to the same conclusion at the end of his life after writing great classics and becoming a rock star of Russia. He's going to give it all up, walk all away from it, and he's going to die a lonely old man in a train station by himself, having given up all his wealth. These are important ideas, and maybe it will resonate with your own life too. The idea that if you want to bring more peace into your life, into your day, try just sitting still and not wanting anything. Watch what happens. Watch how you feel. Observe how you feel. This is the lesson. China had other belief systems that were very important in the way that its society began to grow. And I would like to explore a little bit about Confucianism, because this became as well a rivaling idea to Buddhism in terms of what was important to the Chinese mind. When we think about the evolution of civilization, of who had the power and who didn't, of how empires were growing and how they were sometimes falling, it has to do with what we were thinking, what our ideas were, what was happening in our heads. That's where it all begins. When we talk about animals, your dog, the squirrels, they act from instinct. When we talk about the ants and the bees, they act from instinct. But humans act from here. And so what happens in our heads and the ideas that we have are very important. Confucianism was the idea that also talked not about a God king, but about family loyalty, about a sense of order that will bring peace to our societies. We're seeing in both Buddhism and Confucianism this idea that was similar to what we saw in the beginnings of other religions and faiths, which is there is more to the human experience than the worship or following a strong man leader. This is why religion is very important for us, and faith is very important. And it's why, in spite of everything that I say, I will always engage with the students who are religious in this class in a very deep way, because I understand what Arnold Toynbee said, another world historian, about human nature is not enough without God's grace. We need the grace, the feeling of a higher power, a higher being in our lives that is separate from the rulers and beings on earth. This brings us something else that is very important. But I'm afraid to break the news to you that in spite of China's movement towards the idea of something beyond the God King, it is in China where we see the first emperor emerge in human history. I'm going to show you a scene from a documentary momentarily that will give you an idea of just how deeply ingrained the idea of the God King was among the Chinese too. Even though they were beginning to look at the world in different ways through Buddhism and Confucianism, China also had the belief, I'm afraid to say, that they were the center of the world. It's called the mandate from heaven. To this day, you may find, if you go to China and spend some time there, that you may find people who believe that the Chinese, the oldest and most powerful civilization on earth, more powerful in terms of its impact on the world than India because of its longevity. The God King has been central in its culture too. I want to show you something to help you understand what happened about 2,400 years ago when there was a figure who emerged. His name is Shi Huangdi. He is the father of China, if you will. And he brought together the warring tribes of China, many different diverse societies, all fighting in war, but through his cruelty, through his autocracy, and through military power and might, he united the Chinese with their own language and with their own culture and created the idea of China. How many of you, just raise a hand, have ever seen the Terracotta Warriors? That's what you're looking at right now. Do you know what the terracotta? Just raise a hand. And if you don't raise a hand, then I'm going to assume you don't know what you're looking at. And I'll help you to understand this because you're about to see the most remarkable burial of the first emperor in history that is going to dwarf what you have seen so far with other god kings, particularly in Egypt with the pharaohs. And I see, oh, Stephen, hold your hand, okay? Just put it into the live chat and I'll come and I'll stop in a few minutes, okay? I just want to show you this scene from a documentary. The terracotta warriors that you're looking at right now were discovered about 200 years ago in China, underground, in what's called a necropolis. A necropolis is an underground city built underground to bury somebody. The Egyptians had built pyramids to bury their god kings, and we admire them. But there's nothing as grand and nothing as developed as the Chinese necropolis that was built underground to bury the first emperor of China, Shi Huangdi. And in there, you're about to see it, where he was buried, his body has still not been brought back, has not been discovered, even though the Chinese think they know where it is. The pharaohs have been all brought back, and there's no superstition in Egypt around the idea that we can put Ramses, the real Ramses, into a museum. We're not afraid of his spirit. But as you're about to see, such is the power still of the emperor, the first emperor in China, who took about 10,000 of these terracotta soldiers to his grave with him. He had, in his lifetime, among the many other things that he built, about 10,000 6 foot tall or 5'10" lifelike statues of warriors, and he took them to his grave with him. Each of these warriors, the terracotta warriors, is based on a real warrior who stood as the model so that the artist could create these warriors. You have to ask yourself, Why would one man, one figure in history, construct so many soldiers out of terracotta and then take them to his grave with him? Why would he need that? Just think about that for a moment, and then I'm going to show you something remarkable. It's one of the most remarkable burials in human history that tells you about the lingering power of the God King and how hard it's going to be for the Chinese, let alone the rest of the world, to recognize that there is more than the power of one individual whom we consider divine. Let's take a look. And for here we are. And I'm going to put this into the live chat. I can do this. Here we go. So everybody in the cosmos right now, um, I would like you to watch the first emperor, and I'm going to take you to a time code in a moment. So don't start it yet, okay? Just click on it, and then when you get there, I'd like you to go to, I'm going to take you to 103:18, which is the documentary portion of this. Part of it is a dramatization of Shi Huangdi's life, but that's kind of, Hollywood, and it's overly dramatized. But then there's a documentary portion to this. It's really interesting. And this is the necropolis. This is what we know of Shi Huangdi's burial. So please go for the online students, Horace and Oviata, Steve and Andy, 103:15, and run it for about 5 minutes, okay? And I'm going to run here, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start our conversation. Please think about that last line that was just said. And I'm going to come back to something here to help you to understand. They don't want to disturb his spirit. I want to stop for a moment and discuss this a little bit, and then I'll pick up the story and try to move us a little faster as well into Rome, because today is a really important date in history. Today is March the 15th. It's called the Ides of March. Do any of you know what that means in history? You heard of that date? Why we often think about the Ides of March during this time? And we can begin to have a little bit of a discussion about this, and then I will continue and take us into the place, the empire, where the Ides of March and March the 15th is so important. Let's see if there is anything. So let's start for a little bit. And here, Ides of March, anything? Does that ring a bell or something? Let's see. In the cosmos, Stephen, what is the Ides of March? And it's got to come out of your head. Not, no Googling, no Wikipedia. We can't see you. So you could be doing anything. Uh huh.
I don't know.
Okay. The person in Rome who tried to become a dictator, who was the person who transformed Rome from a republic, or at least began the transformation from a republic to an autocracy. You're going to see this in a moment. The story of the Roman Empire is fascinating because for many centuries, Rome, which became the great world power around the Mediterranean, for centuries it was what was called a republic, a kind of democracy. And then there was a figure who emerged in Roman history who was so revered for his military thinking, his military bravery, and his self promotion. He wrote extensively about his battles. It's said by one of the eyewitness historians in Rome, Plutarch, that this particular general who tried to become a dictator would stand on his chariot and be moved around through the Roman capital when he was not there fighting wars, and he would be dictating as he's standing in the chariot and being driven around. He has a scribe who was writing down notes and things that he would in what was that, wax, because the Romans wrote on wax, and then a courier would come and take this message to somebody. So it would be as if today, let's say you saw a Justin Trudeau, okay, and he's driving around car, and he's always texting, constantly texting and texting and texting messages to people to stay in touch, to commands and orders. I'm talking about Julius Caesar, the epileptic. I'll bet you've never heard that before. Julius Caesar, an epileptic? He had epileptic seizures. He was assassinated on March the 15th, 44 BC in Rome. And his assassination is very important for our story. But let me just stop for a second and remind you that if we want to understand something about equality and no God kings, we have to look to the tribal cultures in history, the indigenous cultures in history. Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel helps us to understand that. So before I begin to tell you about Rome and about Julius Caesar, but about his adopted son, most especially Augustus, who became the first emperor of Rome and made Rome into a dictatorship or autocracy in the same way that China was under Shuangdi, in the same way that they were autocracies in the American civilizations, in the same way they were autocracies in Mesopotamia and Egypt. The human being loves the strong man, but maybe not so much anymore as we go into the future. At any rate, let's stop for a moment and make sure that everybody is clear on something very important. If you were given the chance to go down into the necropolis where Shi Huangdi is buried and to bring his body back for all of humanity and to make sure that humanity can see it in the same way that we can see Ramses, would you do that? Okay, Nico says no. Jaziel, would you go down all the way down to where all the terracotta warriors were found, into that great necropolis where there was a little river of mercury, and it's said that Shi Huangdi, like Gilgamesh, wanted to be immortal. So apart from taking his warriors down there to protect him, he also started to consume mercury. He ate it, thinking that it would make him live forever. And he started to get very sick from it. Would you If you had the chance, say, go down, Jazeel, and go get the body for us, would you do it? Nico wouldn't. Jazeel, would you do it? You would maybe? Oh, me. Oh God, sorry, I get it mixed up. It's meat, mint. Okay, I get it mixed up sometime. Mint. And I've been calling you. Did I say Jazeel before? Well, I'm glad you corrected me. You have to. I'm sorry. Okay, so many students. It's mint. Meat. Okay, meat. Would you do it? Would you go down?
No.
Okay, let's keep going. No, no,
No.
no,
No.
no. John?
No.
Oh, wow. Miriam?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
No. Okay, good. All right, let's hear it from the cosmos, okay? Stephen, would you go down and get Shi Huangdi's body?
No.
Okay, Andy? Andy, are you there, Planet A? Did he put it in the chat? No. Okay, so we've got Oveata. No. Wow. Corson. Yes or no? Would you go get Shi Huangdi, bring his body back for humanity so we can see it? Corson's thinking. We don't need to arrange a rescue mission to planet CM. Okay. So we need somebody who said no to explain and somebody to say yes. And there's only one person who said yes. So she's going to have to explain too. So who's ready to explain why you wouldn't go down and get his body? Nico, do you want to come over here? Yeah, a little exercise. And Miriam, just to get ready, you want to go stand over there? Okay. Yeah, get yourself ready for this. Okay. So it's on. Take a microphone. And here's your microphone. Great. Okay. So Nico, why not?
Well, I mean, I just feel like it's wrong completely just to go and just bring his body back just for the whole world to see.
Yeah.
Like, because that is most definitely disturbing his peace and his spirit, without a doubt. That's, in my opinion, at least.
It'd be disturbing. So it's disrespectful?
Yeah, disrespectful. Like, I mean, it'd be cool to like
Disrespectful.
around and see, but like to take stuff out and desecrate the tomb, to me, that's completely disrespectful. And
Okay.
it's not.
So it's a question of respect, not a question that maybe you're a little unnerved and afraid that the spell of the God King might somehow affect you. When I say spell of the God Kings, that's what this has been all about. I want to remind you of something.
Like, you think I'd get cursed?
Exactly. That's right. Do you think you would be cursed?
I'm not sure.
Interesting. He's not sure.
I'm not gonna say no because I'm not just gonna close myself. I'm just be like, oh, it's not happening because I don't know. Personally, I think I should be open to every possibility.
Thank you for answering this. This is always so helpful when we get these different positions. Can I just remind all of you that the reason I have spent time on Spells of Our God Kings and the reason I titled it Spells of Our God Kings is because the word spell, what does it mean when you hear the word spell? Spell of a God King. Yeah, spell. A spell. A spell is what a magician casts. A spell. A spell is also a distance, a period, spells of time. So I wanted to make it very clear to all of you that humanity may suffer from a spell. It's called You ready for something really big, a big thought? I want to make sure I have your attention. I've written this down on the smartboard already. They're not my words. It's called the totalitarian temptation. This is a very, very big thought. When there were people writing in the 20th century about how is it that we allowed Hitler, Stalin, Franco, Mussolini, then Pol Pot in Cambodia, and there are so many other stories of totalitarian leaders who demand complete worship and control. And they started to write of this thing called the totalitarian temptation. I'd like you to think about that before I then go to the one woman today. What's that? Cleopatra in our class. Sarah, by the way, emailed me. Unfortunately has a death in her family and couldn't make it, and I hope to see her soon. But
I've personally never heard of it.
here's the woman in today's class. No other women, Andy, Stephen, Ovayata, Corson. Too bad Sarah wasn't here, but she would have something to say. So please, female, who hasn't had a lot of power in history, please go on and tell us why you would go and get the strong man's body.
For different reasons. First of all, as humans, we are curious and we like to see and learn and discover, and why not? And then he was a grand human. And if he built this underground city and this grandiose way to die, I'm sure he wanted to be discovered. If he wanted to be private, then he wouldn't build such a terracotta army and the rivers. And he had a huge ego. So I'm sure people with huge egos want to share that with the world. And it's but I understand wanting to respect his spirit and his peace. That's another point of view.
But would you be afraid in any way
Why?
that somehow you would be cursed?
No.
No. But Nico's not so sure. He might be.
I'm not afraid. I'm just precautious.
Precautious.
And
Okay.
I think it's better to to understand and know before you just head straight in and just know nothing.
If we can't see something, if we can't see it, doesn't it become more powerful?
One thing I wonder.
And once we see it, then it becomes real. Correct? Did I not show you King Ramses' body in Egypt? Did that not help you to understand that King Ramses was a human too? Let me stop for a second because Stephen has something to say, and it's not the first time he said that I am being preposterous. So let's hear it, Stephen. Tell me why what I've said is preposterous. Go ahead. Jump on your microphone. We'll come back.
Well, I just reject the entire premise that if you discover the body of an emperor from 2,400 years ago, that you'll be cursed. I think to believe in curses, you would have to believe in some sort of like supernatural, like god figure, or like any sort of like some sort of religion, or you would have to subscribe to some belief system other than the entire world was just made by a rock that had water on it, and science turned it into like what it is now. I
Okay,
think that there's it doesn't make sense at all.
so you're talking about the idea of a spell being preposterous?
Well, you believing in a spell and also being an atheist, I think is preposterous.
Okay. Um, so you're not saying I'm an atheist. You're just saying generally, you as in we. The we, or are you saying I'm an atheist?
From what you've said, like from everything that
Interesting. That I
I
you
just
you would say that I don't believe in a God. Okay.
not
Fair
from what
enough.
you teach. You teach that the world was made not by a god, but by science and
Yes,
planets and
this is true.
rocks.
This is true. This is absolutely true. And the evidence is there. Okay, okay. Then fair enough. Fair enough. I just want to understand what you think is preposterous, which idea, so that we know what to discuss, because it's important that I can address this, because it's a teachable moment. So tell me again, what exactly is preposterous? Is it the idea of what Nico said, that he might feel a little bit of a curse? Or is it what I have said, which is that the God King may be a spell for humanity that we must break? The idea that we're tempted always by strong men to lead us. Does that make sense to you, or do you consider that preposterous?
What I said was preposterous is the idea of a spell being cast when you discover his tomb,
Okay, sure.
because we've discovered tombs of other emperors and pharaohs and whatnot, and there was no spells being cast there that we know of or that we can prove.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let me stop for a moment and just remind you of something that I said, because I want to really make sure you understand this idea of the totalitarian temptation. It's a term that has been used in the 20th century to explain what we have to be cautious about. John, you can grab a seat. Yeah, thanks, Miriam. Okay. What is the totalitarian temptation? Come on up, John.
I was just gonna say real quick that I'm gonna have to side with Steven on this one, just because like I do agree with what he says. It's like, you know, a body or a pharaoh or a deity, God King, whatever, from 2,400 years ago. Like I just don't see for a second how that would be having any sort of effect on humans today. I just don't see that. So I'll
But
have
why?
to-
But why would you say no? And Stephen, why would you say no? That you wouldn't want to bring that body back so humanity can see it the way we see Ramses in Egypt? Why
Oh,
would
it's a
you say
simple
no?
answer for me.
Sure, go ahead, Stephen.
Well, I consider myself to be a rational person, and it wouldn't be rational if I would go into a hole where there is rivers of mercury, which is toxic to breathe in and to, you know, be around. And you said that the emperor himself, he like drank or like consumed
Yes,
mercury.
Mercury. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I would not want to touch his body if that's true.
Okay.
it's
It's
like
purely
Fair.
it's for
It's
me it's
rational.
purely like of my own personal like safety. So, I mean, I don't any of this like spells and curses and bad luck or whatever, I don't believe in, and I don't
Sure.
care about it, and I don't care about disturbing him or anything. So, yeah.
Yep. Fair enough. John?
I would have to agree with Steven on all of that pretty much. Is that, they are kind of sacred locations from people who, I don't doubt were a very big influence to, you know, societies in that day, whether it was Ramses in Egypt, Shi Huangdi in China, you
Yes.
name it. But yeah, like Steven said, like it would be like a safety thing. Like it wouldn't just be like I wouldn't be a scientific hooligan, if anything.
Okay, good,
to,
good.
to put it lightly. And yeah, like I just don't feel like it would lead to spells. The only thing it might lead to if I go down there is mercury poisoning. So,
Mercury prison. Okay, fair enough. All right. Well, listen,
Steven.
thank you for providing some insight into this. I want to move on a little bit. I want to make sure at least I touch on Rome today because I'm a little bit behind. Nico, is there anything you want to add before we continue?
I think just like one thing, like if he wanted to be found or maybe didn't want to be found, like let's say he didn't want to be found, like what if there's like traps in the tomb for people who try to go through? Because if there is, then that's, to me, that'd be proof that's like, oh, he doesn't want to be found or stuff like that.
Yes.
That's proof to me. So,
Okay, well, I'm going to leave it at that. It's important that you all begin to at least reflect on the idea that the lingering power of the God King and the influence of the God King on our societies has been there in all societies. And the reason that it's important for you to think about it in terms of a kind of spell or a temptation is because it could happen again in our world. If we are not careful in understanding how important freedom has been for us and why we have fought for human rights, the more human rights we humans have fought for, the more free we have become. But the more free we have become means the more we demand. And when we demand things for ourselves, it can create chaos in our societies. It's called freedom anxiety. And I need to remind you, as you will see as we get into the 20th century, but I'm going to start now with Rome a little bit, just to help you understand this a bit more. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator of the 1930s, who was an ally of Adolf Hitler, he said something quite haunting for humans. He said people get tired of freedom. And when they get tired of freedom, what might they seek? Order, control. That's the totalitarian temptation. Somebody, some strong man, some person, usually male, who will come to the rescue and save us from our chaos. Rome partly declined and fell because of this. Let me explain something to you, just to touch on this, and then we're going to conclude today. I want to take you back now to about 2,000 years ago, to the birth of a very important figure in human history, a person who we link all of our dates to if we're going to use the common calendar. We call it the Christian calendar. And so when I say 2,000 years ago, AD means 2,000 years ago, Anno Domini, which is the birth or the coming of Jesus into this world. 2000 BC is before Jesus or before Christ. So there is a person in our story who is crucially important for all of you to understand. Whether you are a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Muslim, a Zoroastrian, or an atheist, an agnostic. His presence in our story has everything to do with the Roman Empire. And I'm talking, of course, about Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus Christ, the Messiah, according to Christians. 2.5 billion or 6 billion people on this planet today, of the 8 billion humans, follow a Christian faith, whatever denomination it may be, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Roman Catholicism, whether it's baptism, or whether it's the Presbyterians or Anglicans, okay, they are all denominations of Christianity. And their story starts with, we might say it starts with Abraham and Judaism, but I'm going to put that aside for now so we don't have this kind of detailed discussion. It starts with Jesus. And we have in our class, thankfully, a student, Stephen, who's been brave enough to, the year of our Lord, the coming of Jesus, but the year of our Lord, the year when he came into our story, when he was born. Stephen is a Christian and proud. There's probably nothing I can say in this course in terms of helping all of you to understand the story of evolution and the story of human society from the position of science to change his mind. This is how powerful his religion is. And I will remind you again of something that was once said to a very important evolutionary biologist who wrote a book called Why Evolution is True. He's one of our most important thinkers, Jerry Coyne at the University of Chicago. And he said, when he was speaking to a very respected group of business figures in the United States, and he was talking about evolution, about how humans evolved from lower form. The story I've told you, a person came up to him at the end of his presentation and said to him, a person who's smart, who understands the world, and who's very religious. And he said, Professor Coyne, I know what you said is true, but I still don't believe it. So the power of this faith, the presence of this figure in our story, Jesus of Nazareth, is hugely important in understanding the now direction that the European world is going to take. And when we come to the conquest in 1492, when the European world, let me bring the map back for a second so you can see this. Oops. Yeah, go ahead. The map is right here. Hold on. Just a second. I just want to finish this thought and then we're going to I'll come, okay? I'm not going to be able to go into Rome today. I'll jump right into it next week and start at 11:10. Rome, the Roman Empire is the first global empire in human history. The Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, when Jesus was born, came into the world, stretched all along the Mediterranean Sea. It occupied what is now much of France, thanks to Julius Caesar's conquest. It occupied what is now Spain. It stretched further into what is now Turkey and went along the eastern part of the Mediterranean, what is now Syria and Israel and Lebanon, and then Egypt, and then Northern Africa, and all these countries now that are independent and have their own languages, Latin languages. Latin was the language of the Roman Empire. They were all Roman. Next week, I'm going to explain how it became so dominant and how, through a kind of spell of the God King too, it began to decline. In the same way that Alexander the Great as I explained to you his story, how when he wanted to be worshiped as a divine figure, he also began to lose the trust and the faith of his men who were fighting for him. But there's no greater figure in human history, probably, than this figure, this person who comes to our story, and I'm going to shoot ahead a little bit to Jesus. Next week, I'm going to bring you back and explain why was he executed? What was he fighting for? Why did he emerge in the Roman Empire, in a province, a small backwater province, in what is now what we call the Middle East, where there is Israel and Syria and Lebanon? Why did he emerge there and then? And what was the power of his idea? So much so that we have made him into an eternal figure. And why are there Christians who believe that he truly himself is the Son of God? We say he's divine in a way. It has to do with something that happened in the Roman Empire. And it's important for you to know that you cannot separate the emergence of this person in our story without understanding why he came into the story at the time that he did. And that has all to do with Rome. And I'm going to talk about that next week. But let's stop for a second and let's make sure that John has a chance to say what you wanted to. Come on up, John. And is there Stephen is also at a few points, and then we're going to conclude today. Okay.
All right.
John?
So yeah, I got a, actually kind of a question and then like a comment. So like
Sure.
the thought of Anno Domini being
Anno Domini.
Anno
Anno
Domini,
Domini. Anno Domini.
Anno Domini being the year of like our Lord, and obviously, but that only refers to Christianity and Jesus and stuff. So like obviously not everybody in the world for as long as as long as humans have been around in the last couple centuries and millennia has believed in Jesus. So I mean, how in that regard did they come up with the Anno Domini era that we live in right now, like 2024 Anno Domini, even though when you think about it, the majority of the world and people don't believe in Jesus. They have other religions.
Not that, no, that's, hold on a second, John. You weren't 2.4 to 2.5 billion humans of the 8 billion today consider themselves followers of Christianity, of Christian faith, whether they are Baptists, Presbyterians, Anglicans, Protestants, Roman Catholics, they're all Christians. So actually 2.5 billion of 8 billion is, what's the percentage?
Like 3 out of every 8 people.
That's a lot of people who look to this figure as their critical anchor in life.
I stand corrected on that.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure. Okay, so very important. That's why I'm spending the time I am and setting this up. But it's, John, the answer to you in terms of his influence to some extent will be, you have to understand why the calendar is the way it is, because it was created by the Roman people. And eventually Roman emperors will adopt the Christian faith and will change the Roman Empire from a pagan world worshiping many different gods to a Christian world. And they won't be the only ones. The Vikings are going to do the same thing. The great brave warrior Vikings who crossed the Atlantic Ocean and came to Greenland and then what is now Canada, and were the ones who were the first visitors from Europe into the rugged, mighty Vikings. They are going to convert to Christianity too.
Yep.
So it's very important.
Can I give a more detailed answer to his question, though?
Well, could you try to be brief, and then we're going to conclude,
Yeah.
okay? Because it's important that I let you go when I always say I will. But Stephen, please go ahead, okay?
Yeah. So if I'm getting this right, your question is why do we use Anno Domini when
Domini.
uh,
Anno Domini?
Domini, yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we use Anno Domini when most of the people in the world aren't Christian? Is that your question?
Just speaking, yeah, like I'm saying, like when you take all of the other religions besides Christianity, you do get a larger share of people. When you combine all those religions, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, you put that all together and then separate that from Christianity, you get more people that that are either non-Christian or aren't religious at all than those who are Christian, just speaking from a population standpoint. So yeah.
Okay, so to answer your question, the reason why we use that is because the calendar that we use right now, that the world uses to keep track of time and the year and whatnot, is because that calendar is called the Gregorian calendar. It was created by Catholic priests, and
Yep.
we never really switched away from that until about 100 years ago, atheists came along and replaced the AD part with CE, which stands for Common
Common
Era,
Era. Yeah.
and BCE, which means before Common Era.
Common
So
Era.
they kind of just like copied the entire format, and they just like neutered all of the religion out of it. So some teachers use BCE and CE instead of AD and
That's
BC.
true.
Thing.
I still use BC. I still use the traditional ones, but okay, let's stop for a second. And thanks, John, and always for your comments. I just wanted to remind all of you that there's a third reflection that has been posted. Okay, and it's there. BC Connect. It will be due on March the 28th. Thank you. Meet, right? I'm so sorry if I've been saying Jazeel and you didn't. It's too many students. Please make sure you're aware of that. And there's only one difference between that reflection and the second, and that is I'm asking you to have one source, one independent source in it. The information from that source, independent of any of my lectures or anything, should be cited at the end using MLA or APA format. Okay? It's getting you ready for your final assignment, where there's going to be quite a bit of research. Okay? Any questions? You good, Miriam? Thank you. Okay. Nico? Okay. You don't want? Sure. Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot. No, the power has been there. It hasn't been recorded. But it has been there, and I've certainly tried to make it. Maybe I've been misunderstood because I'm the first one who's always going to say that history has been written by men, and that's a problem. And there have been female leaders, female farmers, female everything. And I hope that that has been clear. If it hasn't, then maybe that you haven't heard that because, okay. I'm afraid, and I would give you a book to read that would help you to understand this. It's called An Intimate History of Humanity by Theodore Zeldin, a very good historian. And he will help you to see that most of history that we have, recorded history, is about men. But that doesn't mean the men were unimportant. It means there's been a problem in the way that history has been recorded. Women did not have the power and the influence to be able to write that history. They had to fight for it and win themselves the rights to do that. But unfortunately, the women are not there in history because they were not recorded. But we know they were there. And Theodore Zeldin will tell you that. If you can, bring to the class, Miriam, examples of people other than Nefertiti, for example, who was an Egyptian pharaoh, or Cleopatra, who was a female leader. There aren't that many in history that have been recorded. That's the problem. The men were writing this, and they kept women out of the historical record. It's a problem for us. It doesn't mean that I disrespect. I just want to make sure this is clear. Are you suggesting I disrespect the role of women, or? That's true. Well, I haven't gotten to Caesar yet. That's true, but that's only one. That's only bring. Yeah, I'm afraid that history has not been kind to women. If you can bring more examples, great. Please do. Okay. Yes. What's that? And they will. They will for certain. Yeah. Okay. It's coming. Yeah. Sure. Let me stop. So there's privacy here. Okay. Because otherwise we're. Okay. Hold on. Let me just stop and yeah. See you next week. Thank you, mate. Okay. Bye bye. Okay. Stop live stream.